Okay, so what I thought I would do is give a grade to each season of the 21st century based on my opinion. And the problem is, and David mentioned this, depending on whether you're in Richmond, DC, New York, Boston, Caribou, Maine, that grade is obviously going to be different. But since it's my talk, it's going to be my grade and what my perceptions are. And this is just sort of an exercise because it's really just my impression. And I think being with a group like this, I think some of you can say, well, your impression is wrong. But as a kid who grew up in New York and is looking at these big city snowstorms, I'm sort of trying to sum it up, and I'll give you some of the criteria I used. So what I'm looking at are seasonal snowfall trends in the first decade, how the decade ranks compared to previous decades, and what evidence is there on the warming climate on winter storms, which is not going to, it's not solved. More impressions and some stats to back it up. Is that your mother?
That's my mother.
I'm not surprised. No, I'm not surprised that I picked that picture for you. What's interesting to me about this particular picture is that, and I'm sorry, I can't remember your first name. Ed. I know you're North Shore weather. I saw this picture, and correct me if I'm mistaken, this is taken right after the February snowstorm?
February
61.
1961.
Oh yeah. I was 5 closing on 6 at the time.
I was 6 months old that day.
Right. Oh, you're such a youngster. This is in Syosset, New York. I lived in Syosset, New York. I was an impressionable 5-year-old kid. And I just remember opening the door, front door, and we also had what's called a jalousie door with those little window slats.
Yeah.
Now, we lived in a different looking house. But that could be a picture of me that morning. We opened it up and the snow was like halfway up the door. We had to go out through the garage. But if there were ever a time in my life that this picture represents, it probably started off the whole chain of events like, I gotta know more. So, and here you took a picture, or you didn't take a picture, your father took. At 6 months, precocious, very precocious. This picture has a lot of meaning to me. Oh, you took the picture. Are you gonna sue me? So anyway, that picture just like spoke to me immediately more than any other picture I think I've ever seen. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
So winter temperatures, I had to relearn how to use that damn Microsoft Excel and
No, sorry.
Well, the thing was I had all this stuff done before when I published the book, but do I have my files still? So I had to, that's 18769. I had to enter the data again. God. Anyway, what you can see from this is New York City's mean winter temperature. And typically CPC will do December through February is their winter. But in my world of winter storms, it was always December, January, February, March. Even though March is much warmer than December, there always seemed to be good March storms. So I had to include March in what I consider real winter. So if you just look at the 140-year record, the solid line going up there is a trend line, and it's pretty obvious from the late 1800s into the early 1920s, and then keep it going through the century. We've obviously been on a warming trend during the winter. I'm not the only one looking at this, but it's been pretty obvious to me. And if you look past I guess I could use this thing now. There we go. I'll try not to shine it in your eyes because then I'll get lawsuits. You know, there's the wonderful, I'll start in the 50s, early 50s, before I was born. Horrible, terrible. But then came the 50s and the 60s, cool. And then the 70s started yucky, late 70s, heaven. 80s, it starts warming up, and then we start bouncing up and down here in the 90s. But notice how in the winter times, in New York for those 4-month periods, the coldest winters, and some of them were pretty cold, only averaging down 32 and most 33 degrees, compared still down to around 30 years before. And then you actually get into the late 19th century, into the 19 teens, and we had winters that averaged in the upper 20s. So relatively speaking, we don't see this no more. We're not even seeing some of these little bit of cool periods, or even 40 years ago. We're having a hard time getting that cold.
How much of that, though, is due to urban sprawl?
I knew you were going to ask me that. It's obviously an issue, but the thing is, you know, New York City's been urban for a long time, and my estimation is that Central Park looks like their temperatures have been pretty low for a while there because of some local effects. I just think in general, it's warming.
Placement of the instrumentation.
Yeah, the instrumentation's changed too, but I think it's more than the instrumentation. Just an idea is that in February 1934, you have a cold outbreak, a northwesterly wind. It's windy and it goes down to 15 below. We've had a few indications as late as the 1980s, but it just seems to be happening much less frequently that we get such cold outbreaks. Damn it. Anyway, so, and also since basically since 1990, you know, we've had our first winters averaging way above 40 degrees. So, you know, I mean, it's just a piece of evidence. It's not the whole thing necessarily. But there's others. Do it again. Snowfall. Now, despite the fact that we've had some really wonderful winters in the last several years, we've also had some real clinkers. And as a matter of fact, in New York, you know, that 4th season in a row of 40 inches plus, that's great. But it's still at the expense of a general trend line that's going down. So if you have a perception, and this is in the book, 1960s were generally good, 70s, late 70s we had fun, and then the 1980s, not so good. 1990s had these wonderful 93, 94, 95, 96, but surrounding them were some really horrible years. And we're also seeing we have these great years here in this decade, despite what's called the warming. And we're still getting some years that are not bad. But what I'm actually going to say is that despite the fact we are warming, and that seasonal snowfall, at least farther south from here, seems to be possibly going down, we're getting possibly more variability, but at the same time, some winters seem to be fabulous. And as a matter of fact, just, you know, you look at the pattern we have right now in the summer, it seems like once we get into a pattern, whether it be horribly warm or horribly cold, it seems we're getting into, and this is just a perception, that they seem to be sometimes more persistent. So I don't know if anybody's got sort of a feeling about like this particular summer. It's kind of odd how we just keep going back to the same trough at the east. You know, I like it. I think you have a question?